Welcome back. Let's talk about working with databases. On the Inhouse Cloud platform, you can work with real databases and you can pick and choose and connect to as many databases as you want. All right. To manage your database resources, you would need to navigate to the database hub. And I can just do that by clicking on the database tab button. All right, I'm currently in the database hub. Here you can see all the databases that you currently have connected to your account. You can add a database resource by just clicking on the Add Database button. We currently have 7 database options. MongoDB, which is a NoSQL database, MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, Oracle. These are all SQL databases. We have Redis. This is an in-memory database. We have AWS S3, which is a general object store database. We will be adding more database connectors in the future. For now, this is what we have. These are pretty much the most popular database options for building business solutions. You probably noticed that there are 3 different environments, and this is because on the in-house platform, all applications are running in 3 different environments. The development, test, and production. So your web applications, APIs, and automations will run um, in any of these environments. And if you have a database used in some logic, the appropriate environment connector will be used. So let's say I have a function that is, or let's say I have an application that is running in the development environment, and it's consuming database resources. It would consume the development environment database resources. And if that function were to be, let's say, moved to the test environment, it would then consume the test environment database, right, resource. And if that application was moved to production environment, it would consume the production environment database resource. You kind of get the point. This is very important for software development. It's important for testing. It's also important for compliance because based on the app you're working on, the developers, you might not want them to have access to your production environment databases, and as such, you basically give them access to the dev environment databases, and uh, they can basically just build with those resources. All right. So we now see how we can manage our database and our database resources. So now, how do we interact or how do we transact with our database resources? And this is simple. We basically transact with our database resources from within a function, right? So in our function builder, among the many function steps are your database transaction functions. So if I wanted to interact with a MongoDB database, what I would need to do is type MongoDB or look for the MongoDB operation, select the database. Then I will be given a drop down to select among the database resources, the MongoDB database resources that I have, to select one. And when you're done selecting, then a user interface likes to pop up. And this user interface is similar to the actual database, MongoDB database queries. So we have the query, and we have the options, and we have the different uh, query functions. So let's see, let's give this let's name this variable. Let's just call it response. All right. As you can see, as you change the database transaction type, the options change to reflect the options available to that query type. All right, so this is a MongoDB operation. Here you would have to put in your collection. Uh, let's just say, we had a collection called, candy list, right? And we wanted to find one, and we could basically just say, with a name of sweet. It's just a uh, random query, but you get the point. If you wanted to, let's say, use a MySQL um, database transaction, you could just search for your MySQL operation. Is the same concept. Select the MySQL database resource you want to transact with. Obviously, you want to name your um, response. I'm going to call this response again, but it doesn't want me to use it again. So I'm just going to go over here and delete. All right. You can always, manage your variables in the variable tab. Okay. And this is pretty much a standard uh, MySQL connector. You can basically just write your query in here. I can just say, select all from products, right? And I have my SQL query. You can write, advanced queries. This is the in-house cloud function builder. You can do whatever you want. You can reference variables. You could, you know, basically, do whatever you want. All right. And let's see. Let's say we wanted to work with a SQL Server database. The same concept. All you would need to do is just search the database for the database function, select the database that you want to interact with. In this case, I don't have a MySQL database to work with, unfortunately. Uh, but let's say I wanted to, let's say, work with a Postgres database. Check for the Postgres operation. I do have a Postgres database, and it's very similar. You know, I can just type in my SQL in here, or I could use a function. I could write some long script. You know, using the script user interface, I could write some code, whatever you want. You could basically just write your query, and let's say I wanted to do a Redis operation, right? Same concept. Select my Redis database, right? In this case, I have one called test Redis. Select it, give the response a name, and I can run, different Redis queries, and the options will change according to the query that I'm running. And you could always look at the documentation for any of these uh, databases, and based on the documentation, you might get a better understanding of how this query is supposed to run. But this is in lockstep with the documentation. And finally, I believe the last one that we haven't tested is we have the Oracle SQL, and I think we have the AWS S3, right? In this case, the same concept. You basically select the database that you want to interact with. Here, you can basically just enter in. You could switch between the different query types. So we have the puts, we have the get, we have the deletes, and let's see. Let's just put in some. Let's just call this XXX. Um, Based on the query that you're running, the options will change, right? And you can just put in the bucket name, and this could be whatever you want it to be, and the key. This is a standard S3 query. So we only have three queries for S3. So puts, gets, and deletes. These are pretty much the popular query options. And now we could add more. And that's just based on so far users have been sticking with this tree, but we could always add more queries to the bunch. All right. So now we've seen how to connect to our database, connect database resources to our accounts, right, in the database hub. We've seen how to use or transact with the database in the function builder. So let's just take a look at a couple instances of actually using databases on the platform. All right. The first example I'm going to show is in an application. So if I switch over here, I have an application. And if I were to click on the request a demo button, this modal pops up and there's a submit button here that runs a function to submit landing page contact us form, which is this form, right? If I were to look for this function, right, submit landing page contact form, it basically does a bunch of things, a bunch of data validation. But what we want to focus on is this transaction here. At the end of the day, we're taking that form, the data in our form, right, and we're inserting it into our uh, in-house Mongo back office database. This is a MongoDB database into our contact us table. We're just entering this user information in there, and then we're doing a few other things. We're sending an email, but we're not focused on that in this video. So here's an example of us inserting data into a database, right? It's pretty neat, pretty straightforward. I'm going to show you another example in a different application. Here, let's do a to-do application. All right, so we have this to-do list. As you can see, it loaded in. If we looked over here in our lifecycle functions, we have one function that runs on upload, which is our get to-do list. Here, what it's doing, if I were to just search for my get to do, it's basically just running a simple query to my to-do list in my test Mongo database. We are sorting by timestamp, and we're setting this to our app data. We're gonna get into setting of app data in the web app tutorial, so you can jump to those videos and you understand what this is. So when the app loads, we basically go query our data from our to-do list collection in our test Mongo database. And we basically set this to our app data in our to-do list field. And if we looked at the app data in the to-do list field, we have this to-dos. And then we are basically listing that on our user interface. And finally, for the final test, I'm going to test this in an API. So if I were to go back to my tutorial demo function and just add a step and add a Mongo operation, I'm just going to attempt to run the exact same query. I'm just going to call this res. I'm going to be querying the to-do list. It's going to be the exact same query, and I'm just going to return the response. Its function is currently connected to an API. So we've seen, how we used a function that runs in a web application to update our app state. We're just going to test out a database operation really quickly in an API. So it's connected to our tutorial endpoint, and I have that opened up here in my Postman. If I just pinged it, the database transaction is running, and I'm getting the response. Right? Ping it again, get the same response. All right. So there you have it. This is how we work with databases. To connect database resources, we use our database hub to manage our resources. To interact or transact with these databases, we use functions. Now, our functions run in web apps, APIs, automations. So this means that every single application that you build on the platform, you can interact or transact with data. So across the board, you can build data-driven applications, data-driven APIs, data-driven automations, data-driven web applications. All right. I think this is it.